Laura, and I'm the host of Collective Mind. And Onyx is here too, just staring at me. Can you say hi? Hi. Oh my gosh. I have no idea if that picked up on the mic or not.
Probably not.
Uh-huh. It seemed like a lot of people liked the reaction video that we did for the crash course video about DID. And there is also a SciShow Psych video on DID that I don't remember at all, but have apparently watched according to YouTube. So this is a fairly raw reaction, I guess.
It's raw!
Because I don't remember like whether or not I thought it was better than the other one or anything like that. So I guess we'll see.
In 1955, a woman named Shirley Mason visited the psychotherapist she'd been seeing for a few months. When the therapist asked her how she was doing, she said, "I'm fine, but Shirley isn't. She was so sick she couldn't come, so I came instead. I'm Peggy." Through continued therapy, the therapist discovered what seemed like 16 personalities living inside Shirley's mind. She later wrote a now famous book about Shirley titled Sybil, using a different name to protect her patient's privacy. And that book put a rare syndrome, then called multiple personality disorder, on the map. Before Sybil, fewer than 100 cases had ever been reported, but after the book came out, diagnoses exploded into the thousands. In a surprising twist, Shirley's specific case might not have been real, and she eventually wrote her therapist claiming she'd made it all up. But researchers are still looking into the disorder as a whole.
Okay, so I feel like that does a little bit better specifically about saying that it might not have been real, still called DID rare, which bothers me every time people do that because that is an extremely prevalent misconception.
I disagree with your analysis because they were saying at the time it was rare and there was less than 100 cases or whatever. So
if
at
that's
that
what he meant,
time,
then
it
I
was
agree.
rare.
Yeah, we'll see if.
And he also didn't say DID. He said multiple personality disorder, which at the time there had been less than 100 cases of.
Yeah, I hope that's what he meant. I hope that's what he meant. We'll see how he talks about it for the rest of the video. He also said something like psychologists are still looking into the disorder, which they are, but I feel like that phrasing gives the vibe that, like, we're still researching whether or not it's real, but maybe I just have that in my head from the crash course video. That's very possible.
I think you're overanalyzing it because that's not what I'm picking up from it.
Okay, good. Good. I hope that this one is not going to be like that.
Today, we call Shirley's diagnosis dissociative identity disorder, or DID. It often occurs alongside other psychiatric disorders, making diagnosis very difficult, and it's still very controversial among psychologists and psychiatrists. But what's not controversial is that the way Hollywood portrays it is way off. To be diagnosed with DID, a patient needs to have two or more so-called identities, or personality states. This doesn't necessarily mean a whole other person is living inside their mind. In many cases, it's more like their overall personality is fragmented, and different parts of their history and self-image can take control. For example, only one personality state might be able to speak a language learned during a semester abroad in college, while another doesn't remember that experience. Or if...
So, something that comes up in a lot of videos like this is referring to one person's mind that has other personality states in it. And I don't like that phrasing.
When was this video released?
This video
Can scroll down a little.
is from 2018.
Okay, so it's relatively recent.
Definitely DSM-5.
Yeah, I mean, it might be pre-COVID, but...
Yeah, this should be basically current research that it's based on.
Yeah, and that's not what the current research states. They don't call them other personalities.
Yeah.
They've renamed it to other persons or identities because personalities gives the impression that it's just a mood.
Yes, exactly.
Or a state of mind, like I just feel angry today, so I'm gonna call this Bob. And they've stepped away from that heavily because there's so much stigma and people who jump to conclusions immediately and make snap judgments and don't change their mind. that they've tried to be a lot more careful with their wording, and that might have only come around in the past couple of years, but this is from 2018, so like they definitely did their research. So
yeah, I think the term alter is not that recent. I would need to look it up to absolutely confirm that, but I don't think the term alter is that recent, because I think I had heard it before then.
Yeah.
And alter is short for alternate state of identity, which is the official, like, that's the clinical term for the other people, for all of the people, not the other people other than some arbitrary, like, real person. It's not like that.
I was diagnosed before 2018.
Yeah.
So...
And the term was alters, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was alters then, and it wasn't like a controversial thing that psychiatrists or psychologists were still debating on. It was just like it's being renamed and rebranded, and this is the new name because of stigma.
Yeah.
And it's not up for debate on whether it exists. It's just how it works entirely, because they've stepped away from like a psychosis mindset to a dissociative, and dissociative is taking like its hold for dissociative disorders in general are a thing, like depersonalization, derealization, fugue states, etc. Like those are all part of that, and it's getting its own category. So they were reworking how it was worded, which led them to look at it a slightly different way, and they learned a lot more information about it. But it wasn't like a thing that might have existed.
Right. The other big thing, other than as like a rebranding for stigma purposes, the other big reason that it was renamed is because calling it multiple personality disorder was confusing, since it's not a personality disorder. It's very different from a personality disorder, and so that was very misleading of a name. And it's not a personality disorder, it's a dissociative disorder. And the next closest thing, if we didn't want to call it a dissociative disorder for some reason, the next closest thing it would fit is a trauma disorder. So it doesn't
fall into the category of like BPD or bipolar or something like that. It
doesn't fit as a personality disorder or a mood disorder or anything like that. It's not like that. So I know that some systems like using the word personality, and that's fine. We don't. We think that it confuses and to some extent minimizes what the actual experience is, because we are different people who have different personalities. So we use the word alter, or we use the word person. Because
alters develop just like real people do. Like
real people,
your people out here in the outside world.
Yes.
They develop the same way. Like time spent around other things, developing social connections.
Yeah.
You're learning how to think and process. You have different memories, which affects how you react to things. It affects how you talk, behave, the knowledge you possess. Like, you grow just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And as such, you're a person just like everybody else. You just happen to be in like a slightly different dimension crammed inside of one space that you get to talk through, which is weird.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that they went on the movie spot.
Yep.
And
that's important.
I forgot the last thing he just said, but it was good as well, I think. Oh, right, the different memories thing. The amnesia.
Yeah.
I do appreciate that as well, because a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
Or think that if you develop a personality or an alter or person, whatever you want to call it, that they are going to instantaneously just be entirely different with no realistic expectation for how people grow. Like, you're just going to be able to develop an alter that speaks French right away when you never took French or have been exposed to it. And that's not how that would work at all.
Yeah. It's all because of the amnesia. Personalities are partly shaped by environment. So if I haven't experienced some of the things that Jade has, she has a different personality than I do because of her experiences. And it's mostly, if not entirely, because of the amnesia.
Yeah.
We develop separately from each other, and we have different life experiences, so we become different people.
I know a great example for it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Have you ever had the thought process of every decision in your life has led you to the point where you're at currently, and wow, back in 5th grade, if I decided to throw a spitball at Jenny across the room or whatever, instead of deciding not to and sticking up for what I think is right, I could have been in detention, which would have led to me getting kicked out of school.
Right.
This, that, and the other thing. That's exactly what it's like for the alter, is you don't remember making that choice, but for them, they may have decided to throw that spitball, and for them, they're going to have that kind of personality versus the one that you have now. And it's like that whole splitting timelines thing. They made different choices. They got to experience different things. Their world is just a little bit different from yours. It exists within the same body. There's going to be a lot of overlap, just like in Rick and Morty and stuff like that. But you're in a different world, a different dimension, basically. It's overlapping, but not quite the same.
Yeah.
And as such, you're going to react differently.
Mm-hmm.
You may use terms like, if you streamed a lot, you may use terms like POG or KEK or whatever, because that's stream terminology. Or if you didn't, you might use a more refined sort of language because you like English a lot, and mythology, and classical texts, and
more formal,
Yeah. What did I say?
You said refined.
Refined, sorry.
I just added a different alternate adjective.
Refined makes it sound like not using that is stupid, and that's not what I meant to say.
Yeah. I wanted to clarify that slightly.
It's always the perceived, like, educated thing when people use eloquence to talk. Sorry.
So I want to see what else he's going to say about it.
Yeah.
Image can take control. For example, only one personality state might be able to speak a language learned during a semester abroad in college, while another doesn't remember that experience. Or if they'd previously been a very religious person, they might have one fragment of them that's devout and another that isn't. Sometimes these fragments present themselves as multiple people with different ages or genders, but not always. And while these fragments can be complicated with their own wants and aspirations, they aren't there to fulfill, like, evil or criminal desires.
Thank
Good.
fuck.
Okay. So
someone finally says it.
That's very important. I don't like that he keeps using the term fragments, because that is a term that's used for a specific type of alter.
It honestly seems like his information is more about OSDD than DID. Because OSDD has fragments. Their alters aren't as defined with some, like I don't know if it's 1A or 1B or whatever, but I know there are some OSDD systems that sometimes their fragments they're primarily fragments, or like a polyfrag system. There's a lot of little fragments of things, or
we have a lot
the
of
alters
fragments.
aren't well defined, and there's a lot of similarities. They're not really that different, so it can seem like that. And a lot of the information seems like it's more aimed at that than at DID, but it overlaps in a little bit, like with the amnesia category, which is required for DID. Like that's one of the major differences between OSDD and DID. Is amnesia.
Yeah.
But so far, I like that last little bit that we listened to. That's a lot of really good information. Like, it's right. And it's stuff that people don't normally talk about.
So the idea that people with DID are ruled by the worst parts of themselves, like in Fight Club or Split, is entirely fictional. The other major symptom is memory loss or amnesia. This could be missing personal information about themselves or missing memories from times when another personality fragment was in control. Also, it doesn't count if the personality shift or memory loss are chemically induced.
True.
If everyone tells you that you turn into someone else when you're drunk, you can't remember what you said or did, you do not have dissociative identity disorder.
Yeah, that's important to say. I know I said this already, but it's bothering me a lot that he's calling them personality fragments. Because that almost seems like even more diminishing or whatever than calling them personalities. Because a different personality seems like smaller in some way than a different person, and a fragment of a personality seems even smaller than that.
I understand where you're coming from. I'm looking at him saying that as, like, for anybody that doesn't have alters, they refer to their entire being sometimes as their personality. And, like, I like their personality, not because they're just nice or whatever, but pretty much it encompasses the entirety of them. So a fragment of that would mean that main personality is not whole. And I'm hearing what he's saying as, like, other persons, because personalities can overlap with the word persons in that way. And that's the way I'm seeing it, because I haven't as much exposure to Hank and John as you have, but I know Hank is relatively nice.
Yes.
Unless he's dealing with, like, nasty people, in which case he's still relatively nice. He just doesn't put up with them. Yeah. And I'm trying to take what he says in a good light.
Yeah.
I do conflate it.
Yeah. I do want to say, because I don't remember if we said this last time at all, but we are big fans of Hank and John generally. We watch a lot of their stuff. We think Crash Course and SciShow are both incredible ideas and generally very well executed. That doesn't make them incapable of making mistakes, and obviously this is a topic that is extremely important to us. So if they handle something in a way that we don't love, we're going to address that, but that doesn't mean that we think they're bad people or that we don't think Crash Course or SciShow are, like, researched well or anything like that, because stigmas can be so prevalent that you find it in research and you find it, like, it's just so thoroughly part of your understanding of the thing that when you're researching, you're finding things that support that kind of thing. So it's something that we need to work on, like, overall in our society, and isn't, like, fully the fault of any individual person or organization that continues to spread the stigma, because it's kind of hard not to when it's that prevalent. Now, I am going to be really excited about anybody who manages to not spread any of those stigmas.
And parents, imaginary friends, totally cool. They're really common, like 2/3 of kids have them, and this is not a symptom of your child harboring another secret personality. But if a patient has multiple identities, their memory is shaky, and they're distressed or impaired by these symptoms, then a psychiatrist might diagnose them with DID. Many, though, wouldn't. It's not that their condition isn't real. There's no denying that patients have these symptoms. But experts disagree on where the symptoms come from, whether DID is a standalone disorder or whether it's better explained by other well-established disorders. Surveys of psychiatrists found that most agree it's a valid diagnosis, but many think it's commonly misdiagnosed. That's partly because DID is so rare. Most studies on it have very small samples, but it's also because it's very unlikely that patients get just a DID diagnosis. It's usually tacked on to other diagnoses, and this is one reason why many psychologists think that it's better understood as an extreme version of other disorders. For example,
I understand the idea of liking to think of it as extreme complex PTSD. I understand that to a point. I think it has one major symptom that is so significantly different than any other disorder that it makes sense for it to be its own disorder. Unless you want to, like, make a new term for a version of PTSD that has alters. Because PTSD can have dissociation and stuff like that. But I think the whole branch of dissociative disorders makes sense. I also want to address again that DID is not rare. It's not the most prevalent disorder listed in the DSM-5, but it's certainly not the least prevalent, and it's comparable to many other well-established, like he said, disorders in terms of how prevalent it is according to the DSM-5, and more recent studies have listed it as potentially even more prevalent than that. So
I understand that. Even with the most recent studies, I think it's up to 3% now?
1 to 3% is the one I hear the most.
Yes, and that's honestly, that's only more recent in the past couple years, mostly because of how more open and accepting it's becoming, and the change in stigma, mental health in general.
Yeah.
At the time of them filming this, that percentage was probably a little bit lower, and even still, 1 to 3%, while it may be millions of people, is still a small sample size, and especially for people to like they said, a lot of psychiatrists and psychologists don't like diagnosing just DID because it does have comorbid disorders.
Right.
PTSD is almost guaranteed to have with it, like, because it's trauma that you struggle with and stress that's post-trauma.
Yeah.
So, like, everybody with the system pretty much has that, it feels like. And
somebody in the system at least will have.
Getting a
PTSD.
Group of them together is not going to be easy. And
I agree that it's hard
getting
to
a sample
study.
size for a study is going to be even harder, which is what they have to publish their information off of.
Right.
Is studies, not individual experiences, because that can only go so far. So for his statistics, they make sense, even if they're not entirely accurate in that sense.
It's just the thing that bothers me is even if you use the smaller DSM-5 percentage, which is 1.5%, that is comparable with like most of the disorders in the DSM-5, and it's higher than several well-known disorders that are considered very prevalent, including autism. So every time people refer to DID as so rare, it bothers me because it's not substantially more rare than most of the disorders in the DSM-5. It is equal to many very well-known disorders, and it is higher than several, including autism and schizophrenia and more that I can't think of off the top of my head. But it's 2 or 3 times as prevalent, according to the DSM-5 statistics, as schizophrenia. So it's not rare compared to other disorders. Like, it's rare compared to, like, 1.5% is significantly lower than the portion of people who don't have DID. I agree with that. But it's not substantially lower than, like, pretty much any disorder in the DSM-5. And I just don't like the super common idea that it's this extremely rare disorder. It's also frequently, like, it is true that a lot of professionals think that it's commonly misdiagnosed, but it's also true that it's commonly not diagnosed, at least for a very long time, because of how covert it so often is. So it's frequently misdiagnosed as something else when it actually is DID. Or, like, people will show symptoms of depression or of PTSD or something else that are comorbid disorders with DID in that person's case, but they won't show symptoms of being a system because the system is too good at hiding it. So I think that the percentage is probably way closer to 3 than 1, but even going with the DSM-5 percentage, it's not so rare.
DID can look a lot like a dissociative fugue state. This is a kind of temporary memory loss where people behave impulsively, leave their homes, and wander around, and do things that they would never otherwise do, so it might seem like a shift in personality. These people often lose their memories of who they are, so they sometimes invent a new identity to fill in the gap. And although a lot of these fugue cases are a bit of a mystery, some are explained by substance use or neurological conditions. CID also overlaps a lot with post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. That's especially interesting because the psychologists who most strongly believe DID is a distinct disorder think it stems from childhood trauma or abuse, which could also cause PTSD. And DID similarly shares symptoms with borderline personality disorder, which is characterized by impulsive behavior, as well as unstable relationships and identity. One study of 33 patients in the 1980s found that 70% of patients with DID could have just as easily been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder instead. But the researchers concluded that because 30% of the cases were distinct, DID should be considered a standalone disorder. DID is also controversial because many of the new diagnoses seem to be coming from just a few psychiatrists, and some suggest these doctors may be overzealous because they're eager to find new cases. But
that doesn't strike me as, I don't know.
What?
That a few psychiatrists are diagnosing a bunch of people, so...
I don't agree that a few are, but there are only a few specialists in the area. And it is, unfortunately, it is a very common problem in the psychology world to want to make a name for yourself and to make it and be really focused on one thing. Like the times we've been inpatient, 90% of the people that were inpatient with us had the same diagnosis by that psychiatrist because they wanted to make a name for themselves on that disorder, or they considered themselves an expert in it and thought everybody had it, which is just a blatant bias and not good.
I get that. The flip side of that same statistic, though, if there are a handful of specialists on DID who are handing out a bunch of diagnoses, would be because the stigma and everything around DID and the fact that a lot of professionals who are not specialists on it know very little about it. If you go to someone who is not a specialist and you have the symptoms of DID and you are looking for a diagnosis, you're looking to understand what's wrong with you so that you can start treating it and trauma processing and all of that, you're going to have a hard time in a lot of cases getting a non-DID specialist to diagnose you. So if someone is trying to diagnose you with something else and you don't think that fits and you want a second opinion, the best place in a lot of cases to go is going to be one of those experts, one of the few people who study DID enough to comfortably diagnose it. You know?
Yeah.
Like, if I hadn't already had a therapist I really liked, or if my therapist that I really like had been unwilling to diagnose us, we would have gone to a specialist. And then we could have been accused of that same thing of, well, your specialist just really likes diagnosing people with DID, and you went in there wanting a DID diagnosis, so of course that combination led you to a diagnosis. But my therapist, our therapist, I should say, is a trauma specialist. That's one of his specialties, but he's not specifically a DID specialist.
Doctors themselves counter that by saying that they're just better at seeing the signs and identifying the disorder. Regardless, the good news is that treatment for DID with tailored therapy, at least for the symptoms related to identity fragmentation, is pretty effective, which is great because although there's a lot of controversy surrounding the disorder, psychiatrists all agree that real people are suffering and need help. And like anyone else, they should be shown compassion and not made into movie monsters. Thanks for watching this episode of SciShow Psych. If you want to learn more about the psychology of trauma, you might be interested in our episode on how trauma can be inherited.
Well, maybe we'll react to that next time, because I'm curious about how they handled that. Because that can be a slippery slope into treating traumatized people as monsters. You know? I thought at the end there that he was going to get into the cure for DID of fuse everybody back together as soon as you possibly can and then everything is fine, which it seems like a lot of people say, but he just referred to some unspecified treatment, which is helpful.
He referred to talk therapy and trauma processing.
I don't think he specified that.
Can we go back and look?
Yes.
For DID with tailored therapy, at least for the symptoms related to identity fragmentation.
Tailored therapy for identity fragmentation.
Can you keep playing?
Is pretty effective, which is great because although there's a lot of controversy surrounding the disorder, psychiatrists all agree that real people are suffering and need help. And like anyone else, they should be shown compassion.
Yeah. So he didn't specifically say trauma processing. There was also that point earlier where he said that, like, some psychologists think that DID is caused by childhood trauma, which that's the known cause in the DSM and has been for a while.
Okay, the majority of psychologists think that. There are some who don't think that, so he has to say some. I feel like that's a nitpicky point you're making, and not fair.
I can see your point, but if I were making a video like this, I would do something like citing the DSM or the American Psychological Association or the ICD, or like I would cite a reputable, well-known institution that is one of the ones that agrees with that point.
That is confirmation bias, though.
I
That
guess.
is only presenting information that agrees with you instead of presenting all the information opposing and supporting, which he is doing. He's presenting both, which is what I think you're not liking about the video, is that there is opposing information in it. Because the information that supports it is very accurate, and he presents the majority of the video on that information. There are a few non-supporting arguments that he throws in because there are some psychologists or psychiatrists who think that, and a minority is still part of the whole, and he needs to present that information to be an unbiased source of information like this.
I still would prefer if he said something along the lines of, like, the leading theory for how DID forms, or something like that, that indicates that it's not just a handful of psychologists who think that, you know? Because that's immediately where my brain goes when I hear some psychologists, is like 5 of the 500 think that. And I know that that's not inherently what the word means, but that is where my brain goes.
Correct. You're also looking for argument points, though. So you're coming at it with a different mindset that is...
especially after the Crash Course video. I'm waiting to be upset to some extent.
So you're coming at this with a pre-established...
You're right.
I don't know what the word is. I'm forgetting.
Bias.
Is it bias? Like a pre-established mentality that you're not going to like it.
Yeah.
Not non-judgmental. It's the thing like judges have to be. Impartial. Yeah. You're not coming at it impartially. Whereas I am,
or
because I didn't really see the last video. I only watched your video on it. Right. Because I wasn't around when you filmed it. Yeah. So my viewpoint's a little bit different. Yeah, which is not why I'm not trying to defend the points that were from like bad information or whatever. But
I appreciate you playing devil's advocate to some extent, though, and providing a different perspective, because that helps me to be fair overall to the video.
And as much as it sucks for things like mental health or trauma, where it is a very touchy subject for most people because of the emotions that are connected with it, someone disagreeing does not mean you're wrong. Yeah. And if there's 1 out of 100 that says that they don't agree, to be able to provide information accurately, it should be said that at least one person doesn't think this. Yeah. Like, is the Earth round or is it flat kind of thing? Like, most scientists agree that it's round. Most. Right. There are a few that don't, and they're inadvertently wrong because they can't prove it. Yeah. And stuff like that, but it's like that thing.
I guess it feels a little bit like he was focusing on how controversial it is.
It is. At that time, it was super controversial because this was before Anthony Padilla's video on it or any of that stuff. This was...
It's barely before that, but yeah.
Barely before it is still before it, though.
I know.
And especially with his information that he was looking up, he made the video then. There was probably a lot of research that was done before then.
It's after Split, though, which is why... Yeah. Why a lot of it was reactionary to the way media as a whole tends to portray it, and why...
And media does a horrendous job.
Right. So, in that light, I understand still focusing on how controversial it is, but making clear that it's a legitimate disorder, and that Hollywood portrays it very inaccurately. Yeah. I get focusing on those things. You're right.
People with DID are no more likely to... Actually, no, they're less likely to turn into evil or monstrous or bad people than people without trauma. Because when you have long sustained trauma, you tend to have trauma responses in where if someone starts yelling, you shut down and get quiet. You don't get aggressive in response. Some alters do because of their need to protect, and that is the way they protect, is by throwing themselves in front of the danger. That's a little bit different than being the aggressor to initiate the yelling, as opposed to just responding defensively to it. so they're not really likely to turn into evil people or be murderers.
Right.
They're more likely to get hurt or put themselves in the line of getting hurt.
Yes.
Because that's what they think they're supposed to do. Trauma responses, previous trauma, previous abusers, so many other reasons.
Long-term trauma primarily breeds more trauma in the sense that the already traumatized person will allow themselves to be further traumatized, if not seek out abusive relationships, because that's what they understand and what they're used to, and in a lot of cases that's what they think they deserve. So,
or that could be all they know, and they just really don't know any better, that this isn't the way you're supposed to deal with this.
Yes.
And so this is the type of person they feel comfortable in their gut or subconsciously, because it's a familiar pattern of behavior that they don't know is not good for them or is toxic or
but they're
abusive.
not used to having any power, so why would they be used to abusing power? It just doesn't make sense. And there are definitely cases where you kind of slingshot from having no power to abusing power because it's so tantalizing the second you have any power, or that you, especially in cases of like parenting, that you have learned bad parenting methods. But extreme abuse doesn't get passed down like that as much as people think it does, because it's at least as common for people to be like, I never want anyone to have to be treated the way I was treated. I would never do that to someone else.
It also all depends on your situation and if you're out of it or if you're still in it.
Yes.
If you are still in the abuse or in the abusive home well into your adult years, I have seen a pattern personally with some people that get negative and aggressive because they give up on life and give up on even trying because it's taken so long and they've developed so much that they just give up. And when they do, that's generally when I see people turn nasty or aggressive or in the fuck off attitude and stop taking care of themselves, reckless behavior, things of that nature. And that's less about being the aggressor and more about just not wanting to be alive anymore because they don't see the point to it, because life's been shit and they don't care about it anymore.
The most important thing to note, though, is that there is nothing specifically about DID that would make someone aggressive or abusive or anything like that. There's nothing about the diagnostic criteria or symptoms of DID that does specifically that. So the only thing it does is to make like some alters not aware of if another alter is being aggressive for some reason and wouldn't have memory of that kind of thing. So nothing about DID makes someone aggressive, and nothing about trauma inherently makes someone aggressive. That is a way that people can react to trauma, but it's not like the way that people react to trauma. And I think that's really, really important, because inherently believing that because someone has been traumatized that they are going to traumatize other people is really, really harmful and not accurate. Some traumatized people traumatize other people. Many of them don't. So it depends a lot on if there are other mental health issues going on and which ones they are, and how much, if any, therapy that person has had, and how much processing they have done outside of therapy, because some processing can happen outside of therapy, and if they have like other support systems, and like there are all kinds of other factors that matter a lot in the way that people react to trauma. But it's so important to not immediately assume that traumatized people are going to hurt you, because it's just not, that's not
fair.
Yes, exactly. It's not fair. And we don't need to be punished for things that weren't our fault, or for things that we haven't done. You know? It's not fair to us to assume that we're going to do things bad things to you and therefore not want to be around us or take opportunities away from us or anything like that. It's not fair. So
it is fair to be cautious.
Yeah.
Have assumptions. It is not healthy to act on assumptions in general. It's not healthy communication or healthy for a personality or a person in general to develop relationships to act on assumptions.
You know what just hit me is it's discrimination. It's discrimination based on a stereotype, and stereotypes are going to be true in some cases. That's just how life works, generally speaking. Unless something is definitionally untrue, it's going to be true some of the time, for the most part. So stereotypes are going to be true sometimes, but certainly not always, unless it's definitionally the case, which makes it not a stereotype. So if it's not part of the definition of what a thing is, it's not always true for that thing. That's just not how things work. So even if 99% of people with DID were dangerous and aggressive, it wouldn't be fair to discriminate against them without evidence of that for a given individual, you know?
It would be fair to protect yourself and take precautions, don't
like
get
with anyone.
super involved super fast.
Yeah.
Don't walk down a dark street in a bad part of town with your flashy gold rings and jewelry out in the open.
Right.
It's more like common sense kind of things. You can still have them, but for the sake of yourself, defend yourself a little bit. Not that you should have to, but it is an unfortunate side effect of living in a world where there is not good things happening.
Yeah.
Is that some people are good, some people aren't. And protecting yourself and knowing how to set boundaries and seeing how they react to that is important.
But that's true across the board. Like, protect yourself always, whether or not there is a stereotype currently telling you to protect yourself from a specific person. So, I think that's the thing, is you don't have to make yourself like extra vulnerable ever, but don't discriminate against people based on a stereotype. I
feel like we're getting off topic.
You're right.
The video was very, very good. There were some points I didn't agree with, but that's okay. I'm not going to agree with someone 100%, but they did present the information well. They did their research, and it shows. And I like the video.
I like it for the most part, and I think it was much better done than the Crash Course video, and I think it specifically addressed some of the things that the Crash Course video got wrong, which I appreciated. That's my reaction.
Overall, 8 out of 10. 9 out of 10, actually.
7 out of 10.
I think it was well done.
But I would have given the Crash Course one like 2 or 3 out of 10, so much better done than the Crash Course one. We got pretty angry about that one.
Yeah, I know.
Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you liked it. Let us know what you think about the video in comments, or come over to Discord. The link is in the description. We have cool conversations about the videos after the fact over there. So you can also vote on what we react to next. But I hope you liked it, and thank you for watching. And like and subscribe and ring the bell so you don't miss future videos that we do. And the link to this video that we reacted to will also be in the description, so that you can go watch it if you want. I don't know how much I might end up cutting out in editing. Probably not, because it's a short video and all of it was about DID. So I probably won't cut any of it out. But feel free to go give it a view.
Maybe not much of the video, but in general, some of our talking.
Yeah. But yeah, feel free to go watch the original video.
Support Hank and John. They're pretty awesome.
I love SciShow overall. I think they do a really good job.
Yeah.
So I would definitely encourage you to give it a view if you are interested in doing that. But yeah, bye.